I am a woman in my 60s, living alone after divorcing my ex-husband. As a young girl, I entered into an arranged marriage that was broken off due to issues on the man's side. At that time, being divorced was almost a stigma, making me feel isolated and diminished, much like a widow or a divorced woman would. Later, I met my ex-husband, a widower with a son whose wife had died in childbirth. Their marriage had been short-lived, barely a year, making our situations seem quite similar. Despite my reluctance, I ended up marrying him, influenced by the advice of elders. When we married, his child was just over a year old, barely walking, and not yet speaking. This child came to regard me as more than a mother, showing great affection and obedience. Despite not being my biological child, I found myself deeply attached to him. My ex-husband came from a well-known, wealthy family in our neighborhood. He had a small business that suddenly flourished, thanks in part to his father's savvy investments. This newfound wealth allowed me to lead a luxurious life without the need for employment, focusing solely on raising our son, who grew up to be a fine young man, albeit not particularly handsome like his father. I always reassured him that his height would attract women once he entered college. However, my concerns became reality, and he went into the military without ever having had a girlfriend, causing him much stress and self-doubt, particularly about his appearance. He became so reclusive and depressed that I now wonder if he was suffering from social phobia. At that time, I didn't fully understand what he was going through, so all I could do was try to comfort him awkwardly. As a mother, I felt so sorry for him that I would stroke his face and hold his hand while he slept, hoping his condition would improve. One day, he initiated a signal to me, and we ended up spending the night together. What started seemingly by mutual consent soon turned into both of us desiring each other. He had taken a leave of absence from school to prepare for military service, so we spent many nights together, enjoying our time. At some point, any guilt faded away, leaving only a relationship focused on pleasure. However, that doesn't mean I neglected my duties as a mother. Even after he joined the military, I visited him whenever I could, picking him up for leave and looking after him carefully. Of course, during that time, I also comforted my lonely son. Then, thinking my husband was asleep, I was with my son, but we were caught. My stunned husband exploded in anger, questioning my sanity, and honestly, I was at a loss for words. My husband didn't want any excuses from me. Whenever I tried to speak, he would leave the room and soon sent me divorce papers, suggesting we divorce amicably without tarnishing each other's reputations. Given the situation, and the fact that I was clearly in the wrong, I was too flustered to ensure my rights in the divorce. Nonetheless, I received a settlement that would sustain me for the rest of my life, including the house we had lived in for a long time. My husband had much more wealth, but I felt it wasn't right to ask for more. Thus, I left the home where I had lived what I considered a family life and found myself alone again. I hadn't heard anything about my son since then. After asking around in the neighborhood, I learned that my husband had sent him abroad for studies. I had no way to contact my son and thought it might be best to just let things end there. For a while, I couldn't get myself together and just drank or indulged in hobbies, cooped up at home. I met several men through clubs and gatherings with friends, but none sparked any real excitement. It felt like there was some initial excitement, but being with them felt meaningless and devoid of any true feeling. Then one day, a young man moved into the house next to mine. Despite being in a rather affluent neighborhood not typically suited for a man in his 20s living alone, he seemed to be on his own. He was extremely polite, always bowing deeply in greeting. Honestly, the first time I saw him, he reminded me so much of my son that it was painful. Normally, I would have just exchanged greetings and moved on, but feeling a motherly instinct towards him, we started to interact more and help each other out. Every time I saw this young man, I was reminded of my son, whom I had raised with all my love, from infancy through to sending him off to the military. Despite the nights my son and I had spent together, there were also many good memories. Seeing this young man made me ponder daily where things had gone wrong. The more I thought about it, the more interested I became in the young man. He had a good job, but would leave early in the morning and return home exhausted late at night. I found myself waiting near my house, pretending to be out for a walk, just to bump into him more often. The more I saw him, the more he reminded me of my son, and I wanted to create a connection, knowing he didn't work on weekends. I asked him if he could change a light bulb in my house. You might expect someone to show annoyance at such a request on their day off, but he came over, checked the bulb, and even went to the store to buy a replacement. Even when I offered to buy it myself, he firmly refused, saying, "Let me, the younger one, handle it. Just relax at home. I'll be right back." And he ran off to get it. As the weather was getting colder, he had layered up with a hoodie. While changing the light, he complained it was getting in the way, and stripped down to just a thin white shirt. My heart skipped a beat in that moment. I hadn't noticed before, but it was clear he worked out regularly, as his physique was impressively fit. I caught a glimpse of his abs while pretending to help steady a wobbly chair. I hadn't been expecting anything. It was just my own desire to grow closer that had me paying such close attention. Oblivious to all this, the young man was genuinely kind and willing to help with anything I asked. This made me appreciate his eagerness and made me want to treat him well in return. Then, one day while I was distributing pancakes I had made to the houses of my close acquaintances, I knocked on his door. Unlike his usual work attire, he greeted me in casual jogger pants, a stark contrast. He saw me and said, "You've come at the perfect time. If you haven't had dinner yet, don't eat alone. Join me." Initially, I declined, but he insisted, so I ended up entering his home, which was surprisingly clean for a young man living alone. Over dinner, we shared various stories. It turned out his family was quite affluent, but perhaps because of that, he felt he hadn't received enough love from his parents. He shared that since his childhood, his parents had controlled everything from his grades to his career, leading him to move out and live on his own. Now, with a respectable job, he no longer wanted to be swayed by his parents' wishes. In a moment of honesty, I found myself saying, I had a son too. After the divorce, I lost touch with him. Seeing this young man reminds me a lot of my own son, to which the young man expressed surprise. "I had no idea you were married before. I thought you were always on your own." He then proposed, "Could I think of you like a mother? I'm quite lonely myself. I don't really know how to give or receive love." I agreed, and we shared a drink or two with dinner. As the alcohol loosened our tongues, he suddenly confessed, "To be honest, I'm attracted to women who are like mothers. Maybe it's because I didn't receive enough love from my mom." He looked at me intently. I was moved by his honesty. And naturally, we found ourselves spending more time together. It seems we both had hidden our mutual attraction. It wasn't awkward or embarrassing at all. Since then, he's been visiting my house every day. Initially, he made up various excuses, but now he just says, "I've come for dinner," and heads straight to my place after work instead of his own. Knowing the code to my place, he sometimes arrives before me and waits. Thus, we've been keeping each other company, sharing meals and drinks, acknowledging our loneliness. And of course, we haven't forgotten to enjoy our evenings together. It turns out I'm actually older than both of his parents. When his parents came to visit, wanting to see their son, I met them. They bowed their heads in gratitude, saying, "Thank you for taking such good care of our son." It reminded me of how I felt when I was worried about my ex-husband, finding out about my relationship with my son, but I pretended not to know. I didn't want to let go of my relationship with the young man. Continuing from where we left off, it felt like we naturally blended our lives together without officially doing so. One day, I asked him, "Would you call me Mom?" Without any hesitation or discomfort. He called me Mom and embraced me, while I was reminded of my own son in his presence. I had thought that being seen only as a mother figure might bother me. However, the moment he called me Mom, I felt a warmth in my heart. Seeing him turn to me and call me Mom, even on his exhausting days, made all my fatigue seem to vanish. Yet, I couldn't shake off a certain worry. He's still in his late 20s, vibrant, with a promising career and a good family background essentially. He's someone who could leave at any moment. I know that once he finds a girlfriend and starts his own family, he might not even glance my way. Of course, I still have a long life ahead of me, but the fear that I might not find a similar connection again after he leaves is daunting. It would be ideal to find someone my own age, someone with whom I could start anew. But now, I find myself not deriving the same satisfaction from such relationships. The fact that he's young and lax, nothing makes me fear the day he'll leave, which has been adding to my gloom lately.